What's happening, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of the Shift Interview. Today, I'm talking to Todd Nielsen of Nielsen Tactical. Todd is a retired law enforcement officer and a friend of mine, and we had a really great conversation around what it means to carry a firearm, either daily or in unique situations, and what that responsibility looks like, what the psychological framework looks like, and what actual amount of training should look like. So hopefully you enjoy the conversation. I really do think that when we have conversations around and we're thinking about what it looks like to be accountable and vulnerable and responsible, especially as a father, that we have to consider, what does it look like to carry a firearm? What does it mean to be skilled in that area? What does it mean to have the capability to tap into a violent situation if you need to? Perfectly honest, I don't know where I stand on all that. I'm still working through it, but only through conversations like this can we get to an end result. So thanks for checking in. Hopefully you dig it, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Enjoy the conversation.
So let's kick it off there. Let's talk about what you do for a living now, what you used to do for a living, because I like, from my understanding, law enforcement for decades, but
Yep.
not just like, rolling around in a car. Like you're special ops, you're high risk,
Yeah.
very, very kind of the dark of the dark.
Yeah. So kind of the short story of it is I did 25 years with the San Jose Police Department. I started out doing narcotics and then prostitution, and started throwing in a bunch of gangs and stuff like that into it. So the violent stuff just became kind of normal. We would hunt guys. We like one cop killer, we hunted him for 12 days straight. And there was no breaks. There just was no breaks. And we just did not stop. And that was kind of a normal thing for us to all of a sudden start doing, being on the teams. We would just, if there was a wanted criminal, we did not stop until they were in custody, and it kind of branched into then all we were going after were just fugitives. And then because of the prostitution background and everything, we started morphing into human trafficking. And because of the things that we were doing, and we were such a cohesive unit, they put us into all the crowd control stuff. So literally when we went to crowd control, it was already bad. It was get out the rubber bullets and get out the gas canisters and get out the 40 millimeter bullets, and just start taking people out and swinging batons and everything else. And it was intense, absolutely intense.
Yeah,
And
I came up in the festival circuit, so crowd control is like, the CSC services that stand at a fence post and go, the bathroom's that way.
yeah,
it's a little bit different. This is like riot gear crowd. It's type of, that's crazy.
Yeah, so that was my career. There were a couple of stints back and forth in patrol, and it was funny because I would train all the new guys, and the new guys would be like, "Dude, why are you so chill?" I'm like, "You have no idea. I'm so tense right now." And they're just like, "But why do you get tense about this?" And then I explained to him, "Hey, did you see how that guy clinched his fist when he started to get angry?" He's like, "Well, yeah, I didn't think anything of it." I go, "He's getting ready to hit you."
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I should pay attention to that. I'm like, yeah, when you see that kind of stuff, you need to start to be prepared for that. And that then it just became such a natural point of my life that literally if somebody started to drop their shoulders while we're having a conversation, all of a sudden I'd start squaring up and getting ready to fight back, and we're just having everyday day-to-day conversations, and I'm just watching body language. And the next thing you know, I'm just like, I'm getting ready to clean this dude's clock, and he's just joking around with me.
Yeah. So it gets to where you can't kind of discern what's a threat and what's not.
Yeah,
Or you
yeah,
always
because
living like
you're at such an intense level all the time that it's hard to shut it off. And literally, that's what led to my drinking. Just like to go home, I I need at least 2 beers just to chill, just to kind of bring myself down, or just be able to
yeah.
shut my brain off enough to go to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that because, like, so now, we could talk about, drinking and family life and risking all that and what that looks like and what that has
Yeah.
looked like for you, which I definitely think we should talk about. But like, so now you're doing tactical training for law enforcement, for individuals, for civilians. What does that
Yeah,
look
I
like?
do. I do it for law enforcement, military, and also civilians. I've done several contracts with the military for the Special Operations Command, both for the Pacific and the Atlantic Fleet. Um, I've done law enforcement training pretty much every single state in the union now. And then the latest thing is there's just because of the nature of our country right now and the state that it's in, I've been doing a lot more civilian training just because people are like, hey, what do I do if somebody breaks into my house? What do I do, if I'm getting gas and somebody tries to jack me for my car,
Yeah,
or I'm at a grocery store and all of a sudden I start to hear gunfire, or I'm at dropping off my kids at school and I start to hear gunfire. What do I do?
yeah, yeah, and that's really, it's funny because our paths crossed for very different reasons, and I've been having that thought process over the last year or so, much less because of where the country's at, because I don't tend to land in that place of like, the country's going to fall apart, there's going to be a revolution, or
Right.
I'm still sort of figuring out how I feel philosophically about that. But I've I own guns. I support legal gun ownership, and I support you know training and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And about and I've waffled back and forth on whether or not I would carry or not carry. My dad was a Metro police officer in Las Vegas till I was maybe 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. So
So
he's been around the block.
he's been around the block. Like my dad was a Metropolitan police officer when Anthony Spilatro got blown up. Like 70s
Yeah.
mafia. I mean,
That's that's back in the day.
yeah, I mean, he's told me a few stories, and when I've asked him why he quit becoming a police officer, it was essentially, um, gosh, and I don't know if I'm talking out of school or not, but it was basically he was in a situation where he was either going to end up becoming, you know, an agent for the mafia, whether he wanted to
Hmm.
or not, and
Yeah.
or he had to leave. Couple that with he also would have to come home and have a few beers, or it was very violent, physical. It had a hard time separating the two. So I definitely want to talk about how you manage that.
Yeah.
Um, so but I've always kind of been in that place for me personally, where it's like if I'm going to carry a gun, I have to be psychologically ready to use it. And I don't know that I I feel like I've only recently gotten to a place where I understand what that looks like for me.
Yeah.
And about, gosh, I don't even remember. I want to say it was 8, 10 months ago. It was maybe longer. We had a shooting here at a grocery store
Hmm.
up in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I live in Colorado Springs, which is about 2 hours away. But that chain of stores, I go into that store about a week later. And as I walk in the store, I've got my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old in the shopping cart. And there's a huge memorial, Boulder Strong, and it's got pictures of the victims and
Yeah.
flowers. And man, it hit me like a ton of bricks that
Yep.
I'm in this grocery store, and if I go back to get milk, which is in the back corner where they keep the dairy,
Yep.
there's shots fired. I'm screwed. Like I
Yeah.
got nothing. I duck and cover, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's really just a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I came home and told my wife, I was like, okay, I need to get really serious and figure out where I sit here, because it was no longer about me. It was about my two little girls. Like,
Oh yeah.
we're at
Yeah.
this store, we're at this grocery store in Boulder, and Boulder's a pretty liberal, not to, it's hard not to get political, but I don't want to get into a political conversation. But Boulder's pretty liberal, and they got pretty anti-gun, or they frown on
Yeah.
on guns. And so the likelihood that anybody who was in that store was armed is pretty low. And it
Yeah.
just kind of struck me that, like, what's the level of responsibility? Because I think a lot about accountability, responsibility,
Yeah.
vulnerability. What's the level of responsibility for me if I'm in a situation like that, that if anybody would have been able to draw fire, to disrupt the situation in
Yeah.
any way, how many lives could have been saved?
Yeah.
Eh,
Dude, it's such a huge thing to unpack, because number one, I'm glad that you're actually thinking about it before you actually do it, because there's so many people that I run into that they just, hey, I got a gun, so I'm going to carry it now. But they don't think about the ramifications of everything.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell people in every single class: be okay, make your peace with your God, your deity, or whoever it is that you pay homage to, that you're okay that if you have to take someone's life, you're going to be okay with it.
Yeah.
And that's a reality that when I put it to people in that perspective, it kind of changes. You can see the thought processes of, holy crap, I never thought that, hey, that could actually happen.
It's
And
yeah.
and to take your scenario as another example, are you going to be okay with your daughters seeing you kill somebody?
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest with you, my kids have never seen me actually be violent. And I have that capability to be extremely violent, but they've
Yeah.
never seen it. And my kids have seen me tell people off, and they're like, holy crap, Dad's pissed. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
no, Dad wasn't even pissed. Dad was just letting them know there's some fury that's going to come behind that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And them seeing that just kind of gave them a different light. And I'll be honest with you, I know of a few officers that have been involved in armed encounters with their family members there, and it changed the family dynamic.
Yeah.
Because it's real. I mean,
Yeah.
you're taking someone's life.
Yeah. It's funny you bring that up, because I think about that a lot, and I'm actually doing another interview this week with someone to talk about parenting, because I have 8 kids. 2 of them are adults, 6 of them are still at home, and parenting is a huge part of my life. And
Yeah.
part of the reason why I don't currently carry, I have my CCW class scheduled,
Uh-huh.
taking that and working towards, scheduling. Because the other piece for me is, like, once you go down that road, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine the other day who doesn't own a gun, but went and took their class to
Right.
get ready, right? To get kind of in that space. And what he and I were talking about, I asked him, I said, well, do you know what you're going to buy? Are you going to carry? You know what he's like, no, I got to try a few things out. I'm still figuring that out. And I said, yeah, me too. My thing is, once you start to carry, I feel like you will have to always carry. I
Yeah.
don't feel like it's like you can turn that switch off and on. It's like, once you commit to that, you're either always prepared or you're not. And you
Yeah.
can't play house. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta own it. And
Yeah.
he was kind of surprised by that, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Like
Yeah.
is
I tell people, I'm like, look, here's the reality. If you're going to carry a gun, it now becomes a lifestyle. Your apparel is designed around carrying. The apparel that you wear
Yep.
is designed around you carrying a gun. My church frowns upon carrying a gun in church, but I still do. I don't go anywhere without a gun. It's just kind of a fact of life. I mean, I don't even walk around my property without a knife and a flashlight on me.
Right.
And that's just my life. And you have to just, once you commit to, hey, I'm gonna carry a gun, okay, where are you going to carry a gun? Are you going to carry a gun everywhere, or are you just going to carry it kind of now and then? And the bad part about that is, especially coming from a training perspective, you're not doing things consistently. And if you're not doing it consistently, you're going to have problems under duress and under stress. You know, if
Yeah.
you're sitting at the ATM and all of a sudden you feel that gun in your back, and you haven't carried until that day, are you able to turn around and draw your firearm fast enough and quick enough to be able to defend yourself before that person squeezes off a shot? That's a reality.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I've been, is like, and I have friends, who will carry to events, or when they know they're going to be in large groups, or when they're going to be in specific situations. And I understand that because they feel like there's a greater potential threat.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, it's the mindset, because I've carried my weapon a few times. Like when COVID first hit and grocery stores were empty, it was a lot of like, I'm not, I just don't
it's
know, right?
sketch.
And so I carried a few times, and I know that those times my mindset was different than when I didn't, even if the environment was the same. And it was like, okay. And that's when I kind of came to that realization. I was like, okay, one, in the state of Colorado, I'm not following the law. And while we can talk about, laws, good, bad, man-made, whatever.
Right.
But for me, it was like, I from my kid's perspective, I don't want to be blatantly, disobeying the law. And secondly, it was like, I need training. I need more. I need to get into a headspace that's a little bit more clear. And so for that last year and a half or so, I've really been kind of paying attention to that. So I guess kind of the follow-up question to that is then, if somebody decides to start carrying a weapon on a daily basis, how often, like, how important, one, and how often do you recommend that they actually train? Because part of the reason why I've not made that leap is I feel like it has to be part of my schedule, almost like going to the gym, going to work, going to church. Like, I feel like I need to go, okay, Tuesdays at 6, this is a thing that I do because it's part of my lifestyle. I love that you mentioned that, because like I purchased a smaller handgun because the one that I bought originally, I didn't like the way it fit in my jeans. I didn't like the way it fit with certain shorts. So I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I need different things for different circumstances.
Yeah.
People just go, they buy a gun and they're like, okay, I'm good.
I wish it worked that way.
Right?
Yeah, but it's kind of like owning a guitar and saying you're in a band.
Yeah, I've got one sitting back here. I can play 2 chords and poorly at that. I just make noise. I tell people, they're like, oh, you play guitar? I'm like, no, I make noise. And I feel like there's a lot of people who carry who, and this will piss some people off, but it's the reality is that they carry because they can. And they have the right to. But I think a lot of people fail to recognize the enormous responsibility that comes with it.
Yeah.
So, like, from your perspective as a trainer, like, how often, because nobody's going to go do 25 years in law enforcement. Nobody's going to go and do the level of, like, people just don't have the time. But, like, what's a reasonable, this is going to get you through most of the things?
It depends on each individual person, but the thing that I recommend is you do at least something at least once a week. Like I do something every single day, but obviously my skill sets have to be a little bit higher than the average Joe. But if you're doing something at least once a week, whether it be a dry fire exercise, a reloading exercise, or you're actually doing live fire training at the range where you're drawing from a holster, drawing from concealment, drawing from a position of advantage, or moving around different obstacles and stuff, that should get you through about 90% of the types of problems that you run into.
So it's a weekly task. It's like going to church.
Exactly. You've got to get your food and your food being your training, your firearms training. One of the things that I tell people too is go through your life as you're going through your daily routine. Look at what's going on around you. Think about what ifs. If I'm walking from the parking lot into the grocery store and all of a sudden I hear gunfire, what are my options?
Yeah.
Do I want to run into the building, or do I want to run back to my vehicle and get out of there?
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, it's going to depend on where those shots are and who's with me. If my kids are with me, chances are pretty good we're getting in the car and we're leaving.
Yeah.
If it's just me, I'll probably go search it out.
Yeah. I think so many people don't have that situational awareness. And it's something I talk to my kids about a lot. And they think I'm paranoid, which is funny because nothing's ever happened. Dad, nothing's happened. And I will discuss it with them because we homeschool. So we have a very open conversational style with our kids about what we're experiencing, what's happening, and whether that's a construction project or my vasectomy or what's going on with whatever. We talk about all of those things. And so there are times where we'll go somewhere and I'll just not feel it and be like, you know what, we need to leave. Or I'll say, hey, let's go sit over here. And they're like, well, I want to sit closer to the window. And I'm like, no, let's go sit over here because there's just things going on that I've seen.
Yep.
And I want to be able to be either closer to an exit or I want to make sure, just whatever the situation is. And they'll ask, well, like, why is that so serious? Like, why? And so we don't say, and like in our house, we don't really say because I said so, on occasion, and you're just tired and you're like, look, that's it, go to bed. But for the most part, we try to explain it to them. And when I've done that with them and said, look, you need to pay attention to your surroundings and you need to understand that like this person over here isn't right. And not saying that they're right, not saying that they're bad, not saying that we shouldn't love them, but we need to be distanced and discernment, exercise. It's not judgment, it's discernment on what we're doing. And they're kind of blown away by that. And I don't think that I'm certainly not to a level that you are. I'm fortunate that my dad was a police officer and put a lot of that into me as a kid. And so we did talk about that, which is funny because my dad never took me shooting. I've never seen my dad fire a gun. And
really?
Yeah, and he's got trophies. Like he was a sharpshooter. He told me a story one time. He got called up probably 10, 15 years outside of being off the force. And they called him up and say, hey, we're doing a competition. We need a fourth man. And our guy bailed. Will you come shoot for us? And he was like, I haven't fired a gun in 5 years. And they were like, that's all right, Tim. We know you can shoot. Come on out.
Yeah.
He went out there and it was like just crushed everybody. He's just great. It's just the skill that he's got. Which is unfortunate because I can't see, so I do not have that. I don't have that talent. But yeah, I think the situational awareness is such a big deal. And I think a lot of people like to play house. I think they like to feel good and they like to feel safe. But Mike Tyson had this great quote. He was like, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you got to kind of know how to take a punch.
Yeah. When I heard that first bullet whiz past my head, that kind of changed my world. And I went, okay, yeah, I can truly die doing this job, even though I had buried 2 buddies by that point in time. And, it's just one of those things where you've got to understand that there's bad people out there everywhere you go, everywhere. And, do you want to defend against that? Then, okay, then you've got to take on that defender role. Or if you want to just be able to evacuate, then your situational awareness has to be 5 times better than what mine is, because I'm there to stand and fight versus, hey, how do I get out of there? I'm still looking at where's my nearest avenue of escape. What are my escape routes? Do I have to go through the kitchen in a restaurant to get out of there? And then once I pop out, where am I going to pop out at?
Yeah.
It's just, there's little things like that that I'm constantly looking at. And it was funny because, like I told my son grew up around all the teams and everything else, and then went away for his mission. And he first gets put into an area in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was kind of the ghettos.
Mm.
And it was funny. He sent me a message, Dad, I totally get it now. Now I see it. Now I see what you mean when you were walking around looking at exits and looking at what people are doing, what people are holding in their hands, how people are looking at other people, and
Yeah.
how people are watching other people. And he's like, now I finally get it. I'm like, perfect. All right, cool. Dad job. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah, it's
worked.
funny how as they get a little bit older, they start to realize, oh, there's some wisdom here. There's a little bit of,
Yeah.
yeah. So, um, I want to circle back on this before we kind of get into the mental health and some of the things that all of this sort of mindset stuff brings challenges with.
Right.
Is we kind of talked a little bit before about this Jordan Peterson quote about, a dangerous man, right? And
Uh-huh.
Jordan Peterson gets a lot of flack. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think if he spoke a little more succinctly and with smaller words, people wouldn't get so mad at him.
Yeah.
But he says a lot of really, really smart things. And I came across this quote like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. Um, and he said, a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. And man, I was like, that's so relevant. And it creates, like, people don't like the connotation of the word dangerous, and people don't like
Right.
the masculinity behind it. And it leads to, toxicity, and it leads to aggression and violence. But what I
Yeah.
think is interesting is that people don't recognize that we're humans, yes, but humans are animals, and we have animalistic instinct.
Yeah.
And when and humans are capable of really, really, really dark, evil, despicable
Yes.
things. And as much as I like to believe that the only thing that drives out darkness is light,
Yep.
there is also the necessity to be able to combat that darkness.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think people want to face that. I think uh, it's a really interesting sort of duality for me, where, like, we're fighting this masculine culture, but it weakens society.
Yeah. Um, well, it's funny because I've had gals on our teams, and they are way more aggressive than us guys are, especially in armed encounter situations, or physical altercations.
Yeah, I can't speak
And
to armed encounters, but I have 6 daughters, and they fight physically way more than my 2 boys do.
oh yeah, and
They're brutal.
yeah, exactly, and they don't care, and they won't stop until they're done. Till they think they're done.
Yeah, there's some mama
And
bear instincts going on or something.
yeah, exactly. Well, and I had a group of gals that I was coaching at one point in time, and they're like, well, I don't think I could actually hurt somebody. I go, let me just ask you this. What if somebody was trying to take your kid away from you, and you have the ability to utilize your firearm to stop them? Would you do it? And they're like, oh, in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
Well, what's the difference between you and your child? There isn't any.
yeah,
And and I go, look, having these skill sets is one thing, and knowing how to use them is another, but then understanding that you can use these skill sets, or you don't have to if you don't want to. And to me, that makes people dangerous, is when they have the skill sets, but they just go, no, I don't need to use that right now. I can talk my way through it,
yeah.
or I can fight my way through it easy. Anybody can fight. Whether or not they win is a different story.
Yeah. I saw I think it was Jocko Willenick who was in an interview. It might have been Andy Roselli, I don't remember. Um, and they were talking about the necessity to be able to take a punch, the necessity to be able to defend yourself, protect yourself, whether
Mhm.
that was fists, firearms, whatever that was. But in the conversation, they stopped and they said, and running is always an option. Walking
Yeah,
away is always an option. And he even went so far, I can't remember who it was, but he went so far as to say, and honestly, none of the other things should come until you've tried to flee or talk your way out of it. Like, and I think people tend to think that because they have a skill set or because they have a firearm or because they have the ability
right.
to enact violence, that that becomes the tool versus like the last resort. Because I've always viewed it as, and this is again, this goes back to my dad. My dad always told me, he said, you draw a weapon, it's to kill somebody. It's not to threaten, it's not to, puff your chest up, it's not to act as if you know it's something else. Once you draw, you have to be prepared to pull the trigger. And because that's such a last resort thing to me, for me anyway, I always felt like there had to be other solutions
Lose you. Hang on.
to edit that. So I'll have to go back and listen to that.
No
What were you
worries.
saying? It just like went away and came back. So
Yeah.
what was the last part you heard?
Talking about Jocko or Andy
Yeah.
Frisella.
Yeah. He was talking about the ability, like having the ability to walk away, in this case, flee, right? Like you can
Yeah.
always run. And there's no shame in that. Like we have
No.
this idea that like running away from something or leaving, like, and I think that's where the toxic masculinity part comes in, is like we've lost the ability to go, this isn't worth my time or energy. Like we feel like it's like it was a Back to the Future, right? If he got called chicken, that was it. He was in it. And it was like, you
Yeah.
call me chicken, I don't care. That doesn't mean shit to me.
Yeah. Those are just words.
Yeah, yeah. So I wonder, like, how do we, maybe you have thoughts, maybe you don't, but I'm just curious, like, how do we get the idea across culturally that, like, you can be strong, you can be prepared, you can have tools, but you don't have to use them because that's like wisdom, right? Like, and I don't
Yeah.
think we talk enough about the wisdom piece behind what it means to just walk away.
You know, there's especially doing crowd control stuff. I mean, I've had people call me every single name in the book, because my birthmark, I stand out like a sore thumb. It just kind of is what it is. And literally, when I first started in law enforcement, it bugged me anytime somebody would say anything about it. And then I finally just got to the point where it's like, dude, it's just words. And it's funny because when you have the ability to actually just turn and walk away, it pisses them off.
Oh, so much.
It makes them even more mad because they're not getting to you.
Yeah.
And, there's been times when I just sit there and I just cross my arms and just go, okay, let me know when you're done screaming and yelling and calling me names and everything else. Then we can have a conversation like an adult. Oh, yeah, I'm acting like a child. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I've diffused more situations just by simply just letting them getting their little verbal jabs in, and then just go, okay, now are we done? So that we can actually have a conversation. And for me, that's like you said, it's wisdom. And it took a lot of time for me to kind of get to that point in my life where, okay, I can fight with this dude, or I can fight with this gal, or I can fight with these people, or I can go, look, either way, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
You can decide. We can
Right.
do it both ways. And I definitely have the skill sets to play it both ways. But I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, everybody's happier if everything goes smoothly.
Yeah. it's so funny. When I was in high school and a young adult, it's like all the guys are jockeying for position, right? And they're trying to figure out who's the tough guy. And
Yeah.
I had been in fights and I got to a place where it was like, if I could talk my way out of this, if I could problem solve, if I could conflict resolution something,
Yeah.
because I'm down to get into a fight. And it hurts. Getting
Yeah.
punched hurts. Getting
Yeah.
kicked in the ribs hurts. So if I can talk my
Yeah.
way out of it, like
Yeah.
I feel like I can handle myself in fairly average situations.
Yeah.
At the same time, like 47 years old, if I don't have to, I don't bounce back like I used to.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
like the younger, and so I just kind of look at like, you know, how do we move? And this is the reason why this is such a curiosity for me, because we grew, like I grew up in North Las Vegas and in
Yeah.
between the Bloods and the Crips, and like I was in LA during the Rodney King riots, and I've seen crazy violence.
Yeah.
I've been at parties and when guys would draw down and they would all just talk and everybody be pointing guns at each other. And I've seen kids get beat up within an inch of their life. And
Yep.
I don't understand, like for me anyway, like that does something to somebody mentally.
Yeah.
And so kind of the other piece to that is like you can't unring that bell.
Nope.
So once you get into a situation where you've got to enact a certain level of violence, you have to, for me anyway, it has to be with a great enough why behind it
Hmm.
that you can justify and then begin to sort of mentally wrap your head around that. And man, I just think so many people watch too many video games or movies or things and they think it's going to be one thing, because you watch any kind of action flick and they just they take 3 lives and then they go on and have a cup of coffee and it's no big
Yeah.
deal. And you don't see
It
the
doesn't work that way.
like you don't see the torture and the mental and the, I mean,
Yeah.
so I'd love to talk a little bit about, like, if you're open to it, and you can always say, I don't want to go there, but you can't have done the types of things that you've done and not gotten shook a little bit mentally. Like you
Oh
were
yeah.
saying, like you used to have to come home and have a couple beers just to take the edge off.
Oh yeah.
And they don't train you for that. They're right. Like
No,
doesn't
they're starting to now, in modern law enforcement. They're starting to train people to understand that, and understand that there's going to be emotional trauma that's going to go along with the things that you're going to see and the things that you're going to go through, which I think is a very good thing. I spent a lot of time, well, 4.5 years every single week, going to see a psychologist just to kind of get my head right, because the amount of violence that we were going through and the amount of violence that I've seen, like literally we got to a fight call. Turns out it wasn't actually a fight call. It was this guy that was about to be executed. It was just a bunch of screaming and yelling. And the last thing that was heard on the 911 recording, well, just do it. And then they heard a gunshot. Come to find out, the guy was on his knees with his hands behind his back or behind his head, and they executed him right then and there. And literally when we got there, you could still smell gunpowder in the air. I mean, it was like this. We missed it by seconds. And that one, it was one of those where you just go, holy crap, if I had been 30 seconds faster, could I have saved this guy's life? And the reality of it is, no, you couldn't. That's just the way it was. I was the first guy to arrive on a an armed robbery deal where this guy literally got stabbed 26 times, and I'm putting my fingers in his carotid artery to keep the blood in his body. And 9 days later, that guy walked out of the hospital just for the record.
Wow.
But absolutely the most horrific crime scene that I've ever been involved with. And there's still times where I'll smell blood and boom, all of a sudden I'm right back there again. You know, and that's just part of our coping system in our bodies, you know. And it took me, I'm coming up on almost a little over 6 years of retirement now, where I can smell blood now and it doesn't really affect me anymore. The parts, they're like, the end of October is always the worst for me, because I literally lost 3 friends within a week. 2 years difference, but 2 friends I lost within 4 days of each other. One due to a helicopter crash, and then literally my buddy was coming home from his funeral and crashed and was killed then.
Oh.
And then 2 years later, the day before Gordy died, the one that died in the automobile crash after the funeral, another buddy took one to the face and was killed instantly. However, we did hunt his killer, and we had him in custody in 12 days. So that was a huge win for us, but we still lost somebody there. You know, so October is kind of it's a rough week for me to go through that, even now. And Jeff was killed in 2002.
Wow.
You know, so it's still a piece that still kind of, it's still there. But, you know, in talking with counselors and talking with people that have gone through that same trauma, the survivor guilt is very normal. And kind of the way that I've learned to deal with it, it's like, you know, Des, Gordy, and Jeff aren't here. However, that gives me the opportunity to go, now I can live my best life, not only for me, but I can do it for them too.
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny how that drive, when I look at things from that perspective, I'm like, hey, Des didn't get a chance to do this. Gordy didn't get a chance to do this. Jeff didn't get a chance to do this. You know, and there's a couple other friends that I've lost along the way too. And, you know, when I think about them and Mikey, and I just go, dude, I have this opportunity to do all these great things in my life. Hell yeah, I'm going to take that risk.
Yeah.
You know, and it's crazy how powerful all of a sudden you become when you sit there and you look at it from that perspective. When you go, I had this opportunity sitting right here in front of me, and they never had it. They're never going to get that opportunity again.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, not to get all spiritual and everything, but I know those guys are up there going, yeah, come on, Todd, come on, do it.
Yeah.
Come on. We're right here with you. Let's do this.
That's so awesome.
You know, so I just I take it now as I'm going to live the best life I possibly can so that I can do it for them, you know. And it's cool because I reap the benefits, my family reaps the benefits, my friends reap the benefits of it. Why not?
Yeah.
You know, let's give them the opportunity. Let's shine for them, you know, be that light like you were talking.
How do you train that? Like, because I mean, you know, a couple years ago, my wife had a stroke, and her and I had very different experiences, obviously. And I resolved that day that, like, I'm gonna live life to its fullest, because she was 40 years old. There was no reason for her to be having a massive stroke and having 4-hour brain surgery at 40. Like, so, like, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, man, there is not a single moment that is promised. And for me, time is like our most valuable asset, because I can go make more money, I can grow food, I can go hunt, I can figure those things out.
Yep.
I can't get yesterday back, right?
Nope.
So I'm wondering, I'm curious about, I mean, so many things. Like, doing it for them is an awesome way to honor them, right? And to say, okay, I'm going to live this to the fullest. But I also wonder, and I've had this conversation with a few people, like, how do we impart that sort of mentality in people without them having to face death, lose somebody, be in the position that you and I have been in, and get them to recognize the value of it? And then I also wonder, like, how do we shift that culture in law enforcement where it isn't weak to need help, or to, because everybody's going to process that kind of stuff differently,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And it's always been looked at in my mind, even outside of law enforcement, just the masculine culture has always been, stuff it down, don't deal with it, don't ask for
Yeah.
help, don't cry, don't, suck it up.
Yeah.
And like, it's cool in movies, but I mean, I've lived with a parent who didn't deal with his emotional trauma,
Yeah.
and it sucks
Oh,
when,
it totally does. My biological father was a Vietnam vet, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with the reason why he's not involved in my life. And he had a drinking problem, and him and my mom separated because of that. And I think, in dealing with and getting people to understand that, I think it's just simply having a conversation about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Like, even the guy that I call my dad, he was very kind of a recluse. He never really talked about his emotions or anything else. And it wasn't until I was probably 35 years old till he actually finally said, "Hey, you know what? I love you." And, you know, us as guys, come on,
yeah,
we know it and we want to say it. It's just we don't, and it's funny because my wife gets mad at me all the time. She's like, "Well, how come you don't say I love you all the time?" I go, "Because I want everyone to know when I say I love you, I love you." And there's so many people, "Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you." They say it so
yeah,
often that it doesn't really mean anything. But if I say it once a week to my daughters, it's amazing the effect that it has on them, and kind of getting to the law enforcement side of it, where, hey, you just need to know and understand that your body's going to go through this. I mean, there's so many physical things that have happened to me just because of the trauma and just dealing with the PTS type stuff.
yeah,
And knowing that, hey, this is what's going to happen, or this is what could happen, and this is how you can cope with it. I think that's huge.
yeah,
You know, um,
yeah. I think uh, it's such a weird time where people, we have like these two ends of the spectrum where it's like, don't talk about any of the problems, don't deal with it. I mean, I had a conversation yesterday where I sort of challenged someone's thinking, and their response was sort of, I remember the days when we all just supported each other. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but it's because I love you that I'm challenging you, because
Correct.
I'm not saying that your behavior is wrong.
Right.
I'm saying that it has a potential to do harm. And so let's unpack it. Let's not just say because you did it and because we're on the same team,
Right.
you're good. It's because we're on the same team. I want to go, hey, let's peel back a few layers and let's run this out. As our buddy
Yeah.
John likes to say, let's run this out and see what happens 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road if we stay doing this,
Right.
because that's important. And I don't want to see you get hurt. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we could talk about it. I'm like, well, like, but the idea that, like, if we bring something to somebody's awareness, it immediately gets shut down and you're not on my team and you're not on my side and I don't want to talk about it. Or we have the
Right.
opposite side, which is like all they want to talk about is their victimhood and their trauma and their stuff. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
but no resolution. And I like, just part of the reason why I started this podcast was this whole concept. Like, I came up in a very violent home. I came up with an alcoholic father. I was an alcoholic myself. And then I finally realized, like, all this shit's my fault. I'm an adult now, and everything
Yeah.
I'm doing, I'm choosing to do. And so I get to
Yep.
choose out of that.
Yep.
And it radically changed my life when I stopped blaming everybody else. And then it was like, oh, okay. And it was weird because I went through like this phase where I was just pissed at everybody else because I was like, why can't they see what I can see? This is all your fault.
Yeah.
Like all your bullshit is your fault. And then I got to a place of compassion where it was like, well, I was really not in that space for such a long time. So
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that whole concept because your world is such a sort of picture of like traditional masculinity, right?
Yeah.
And like some people aren't going to watch this on YouTube, they're going to listen to it. But you know, you and I both in full beards,
Yeah.
we go to the gym, we're muscular, we do
Yep. Exactly.
that we do. Like if you and I are walking down the street, you know, we look like,
Yeah.
you know,
Feel like that's some
traditional
masculine dudes.
masculine guys.
Yeah.
And most of the conversations that we have center around how we're feeling, what's happening with our kids,
Yep.
like, and so I'm passionate about shifting that conversation. And I'm curious, you know, when you retired and you moved into that sort of space, do your law enforcement friends get it? Are they on board with it? Do they kind of go, oh man, Todd went soft on us? What's that? What's the poker night look like now that you got feelings?
Oh, dude, it's hilarious because like a couple of my old teammates, I mean, we had some hardcore individuals on our teams. I mean, some of those cats, it's like I knowing what I know and knowing what they know, I wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley if they're pissed off because it's gonna get ugly.
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny how those guys would sit there and go, oh, you know, we don't need to talk about our feelings and everything else. And I'm like, look, bro, you know, I've had too much time in counseling. I've taken an overall look at my entire life and just said, you know what, this is what's going on. This is what I can do to fix it. And if it's literally this easy, why isn't everybody else doing it? It's because we're comfortable. You know, you're comfortable being in that space. You're comfortable being in that, you know, that pain, that suffering, or that trauma, or that world. When you take the time to sit there and look at what benefit does it actually bring you, then, okay, if it's bringing you a benefit, cool. Then fine, continue down your path. But if it's not bringing you a benefit and it's a detriment to you, then it's time to look at, hey, you need to change something. You need to change this.
Yeah.
You know, kind of another example of that. My son was supposed to be on a 2-year mission and he ended up cutting it short because of anxiety stuff. He's like, well, Dad, I feel like I'm going to let everybody down. I go, stop right there. What are you doing for you? And he's just like, well, you know, this is my, you know, this is what I'm supposed to do. I go, what are you supposed to do? Not what everybody else says you're supposed to do. What are you supposed to do? And when you look at it from that perspective of, you know, is it good for me? Then I'll continue doing it. If it's bad for you and it was causing him so much anxiety that he couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, I'm like, okay, then you know what? Hey, then come home. Come home from your mission. It's good. It's fine. You know, and I tell guys that are in law enforcement now, you know, one of my partners that I work with on the training side of stuff, I'm like, look, dude, you need to make sure that you're okay with everything that's happening at work, you know, and you're going to see the bad things. And, you know, he had one the other day where he had to rip a kid out of this gal's arms because she wasn't being a good mom. And he's like, man, that sucked. I go, yeah, let's unpack that. Let's go through that whole process. And he's like, wait, what do you mean? I go, let's get in depth. Let's do a deep dive into this. You know, let's get into the nitty gritty. How did that make you feel? And he goes, man, I felt like I was ripping my own kid out of my own arms. I'm like, yeah, every cop goes through that. And that's that's a reality, so I think we just need to have an open mind, to go, I can take other people's thought processes and think about them and see if it applies to me, and see if it'll make me better. Kind of my analogy is always be better tomorrow than I was today.
Yep.
And if I'm doing something today that is not going to make me better tomorrow, then I'm going to stop doing it.
Yeah. It's one
You
of my
know?
favorite. It's one of my favorite things. Is I think it was Jordan Peterson also who said, "Only ever compare yourself to you yesterday,
Yeah.
and not anyone else,
Yeah.
because it's all that matters. Is how am I showing up today?" And I mean, you and I have the privilege of having some time freedom, right? You're
Yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
You've got other things you're doing, but you're doing them on your terms.
Yeah.
And we've created, my wife and I, a decent lifestyle within network marketing that I kind of set my day how I want, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of that, I get to make the conscious choice to take the time to think through things, and to when things are going sideways or I'm feeling certain ways about things, I can stop and
Right.
really unpack it or think about it, or I can reach out to different people and talk about it. A lot of people don't have that time, or they don't feel like they
Right.
do, because they got to get up, they got to get the kids to school, they got to go to work, they got to come home, they got to do homework, they got all of the different things. And so I'm curious for you, like you said, your son, is on his mission, and he feels the weight of all these expectations on himself,
Yeah.
that he doesn't feel like he can stop and take care of himself and put himself first.
Right.
And that's a lot of insight on your part, to be able to say, hey, expectations be damned, you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, where does that confidence for you come from, or that courage to, is that just because you've seen enough stuff that you're like, none of this matters? Or like, have you thought about that? Like, where does that level?
Yeah, it comes from a number of different places, to be honest with you. I mean, number one, because I've done so many things, and I've faced so many trials, in such rapid succession, that it's become kind of a normal thing for me just to deal with hard things right away, and just face them up front. Um, One of the things that I tell people all the time is like, hey, if you're dealing with something that's hard, deal with the part of it that you can right now, and then take the next thing, and then take the next part of it, and the next part of it, and the next part of it, and just work your way through it in little pieces at a time. You don't have to take on the whole thing at one shot. And I was certain when I was forced to retire at 47 that I was like, okay, my life is over. And to be honest with you, I didn't think I was going to make it to 50 years old. And now I'm 53. So it ain't hard to do that math. But there's a huge part of my family, my wife, bless her heart, she is one of the strongest women I've ever met my entire life. She's put up with all of the police work stuff, which, anybody that's been involved in the law enforcement family alone, exactly what I'm talking about, or first responder, military, what that's like.
Yeah. Those marriages often don't last.
No, they don't. They don't. And without her, I can guarantee you the last 6 years probably wouldn't be as good as they have been. And then there's a big faith part of that too, where I just decided that, I'd always been kind of a faithful person, but I just decided that, hey, I'm going to start living my life specifically for my Savior. And that is a huge motivation.
Interesting.
And I've been very fortunate to be involved with my church, to be involved with the youth and everything else. And I tell you what, they keep you young, dealing with 13 to 17-year-old boys. You don't
Yeah.
have a choice but to try and is
Try and
to
keep
stay
up.
young, to keep
Yeah,
up with them.
absolutely.
So and then knowing how much of an influence I'm having on them, and unfortunately you don't see the influence that you have on people until you start to get older. um,
Yeah.
and when you start to realize the amount of influence that you have on people, it's empowering.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you
It's it's so funny, this idea. I feel like the younger generation has this idea that like their purpose in life is to just live their life to their fullest and just to get their piece of the pie and to go do whatever it is that their heart desires. And I think there's some truth to that. Like, yeah, you should follow your dreams and go after what you want.
yeah,
And I think this piece that gets forgotten a lot is that we don't live in a vacuum, and everything we do impacts other people.
yeah,
And oftentimes we get to choose whether we're having a positive or a negative impact. I don't think it's ever very often neutral, right?
right,
Like it's either positive or negative. And I find so many times, I think it just comes with age, that, and you have to experience it, and you have to like kind of be able to come up to 30,000 feet and see
yeah,
the the largeness of it. But yeah, man, I've gotten to a place where I'm really, really driven to help younger people understand, because my wife and I had dinner with a friend of hers last night who's a young adult, tough home, tough choices,
yeah,
little anxiety, has lost multiple friends in the last 2 years to suicide. And
yeah,
we just left that dinner and I was like, the younger generation right now is so hopeless.
yeah,
And the more that we can help them find people and get people who've been through, because if there's anybody who's got a reason to be hopeless, I mean, you spent 25 years in law enforcement, and if I had to guess, I would probably say that the type of things that you saw only got worse over time.
oh
Like,
yeah,
I have to feel like you sometimes look back and go, what was it all for? Did we even move the needle when it comes to violence and gangs and trafficking and prostitution? And like, not to be
yeah.
a but
There
like,
there was a time, what was it, in 2005? I was still working undercover stuff. Had a big, huge Fu Manchu mustache and everything. You would have never known. I mean, you would not have recognized me. But I had this guy walk up to me, and I'm in downtown San Jose, and I'm watching a dope deal, and I'm watching all this stuff going on. This guy walks up to me and goes, "You're Officer Nielsen." I'm like, "Dude, I don't know who you're talking about. Get out of here." I was just being a dick to him. He goes, "No, I know who you are. You don't remember me, do you?" And I'm like, "Great, here we go. I'm gonna
cover's
get in this
blown.
dude's clock right now."
Right.
And he goes, "I just wanted to say thank you." And he reaches out his hand and shakes my hand. He goes, "What you did for me was amazing." He goes, "I'm Ysidro Villano's brother." I'm like, "Ysidro Villano? Holy crap, I haven't heard that name in like 7 years." And literally, we were at his house, kicking in the door, looking for his brother, probably 6, 7 weeks in total, almost once a week, sometimes 2 times a week. And every single time I had this conversation with him, I go, "Look, don't do like your brother did. Stay away from the gang. Stay out of drugs. Try and stay clean. Try and keep away from the alcohol and everything else. Do good for the world rather than doing evil." And he goes, "I wanted to thank you because that conversation that you had with me, though, every single time that you guys were at the house, that actually rang and resonated with me." So, and next week I'm getting married, and my girlfriend and I, we're expecting our first daughter, and I'm doing really good. I've got this great job now. I'm working for the Conservation Corps, and I'm a supervisor now. And I'm like, holy crap! Here I'm getting ready to start cleaning this dude's clock, and he's pouring out his life and how I had an effect on his life. And I was just having a conversation trying to keep him out of gangs,
Right.
and all of a sudden that was kind of my wake up call that, hey, you have the ability to change people's lives,
Yeah.
and how you use that is entirely up to you. And literally from that point on, it's like, okay, yeah, I've got to start doing things that are going to change people's lives and make their lives better, and
Yeah. That's huge, man.
it is,
Yeah.
and it's just, it's something that I never ever thought would ever happen. And, here I thought he was going to be a gangbanger and just like his brother and in and out of prison and everything else. And now he's got a great life.
Yeah. So, like, for me, that kind of brings up this idea that no matter how bad it seems, or no matter how, you know, ineffective or hopeless things may feel,
Yeah.
it's not the reality, right? Like, the reality is that we're having an impact and that we're changing people for the better.
Yeah.
And I love what you said, like, you have this ability to move the needle. It's
Yep.
whether or not you choose to use it or not, or how you
Yeah.
choose. And yeah, I think that might be a good place to wrap up. Um,
Well, it's simple. It's a simple thing, like just smiling at somebody.
yeah,
It's amazing how just smiling at somebody will change. You can feel the change from them. How,
yeah,
wow, that person looked me in the eye and smiled at me.
yeah. And that piece of advice is coming from someone who could really jack someone up if he wanted to.
Yeah.
So when we circle back to, you know, being dangerous, it's a choice, right?
Yeah.
Having the
It is. It's
skills.
definitely a choice.
Um, I am curious, do you feel like, because we didn't touch on how you got into law enforcement. Was that because you had a rough upbringing, and like what was the call to go join? Because 25 years, 6 years, that would have been like what, the 90s,
Yeah.
early 90s.
1990, I started April
Yeah,
25th, 1990.
yeah. So
Uh,
1990 Southern California, like, or I mean, at least LA. You're talking, massive gang activity, massive,
yeah.
you know.
Well, let's see. My grandfather was a cop for 23 years. And my older brother has been in and out of prison systems from the time that he was 13 years old till probably early 40s. So I've I've seen, the good and the bad sides of it all. And then the guy that was killed in a helicopter crash, he him and I worked together at a sports store. He was my manager, and he decided to leave to go into law enforcement. And I went on a ride along with him, and it was light your hair on fire, go Mach 12, just crazy, just super, super intense that night. And I'm like, dude, I need to do this. So I went on 3 other ride alongs with him after that, and I'm like, yep, this definitely needs to happen. This is definitely where my life's calling is. And it literally, it was my calling. It was my
Wow.
calling in life to go and do that. And I was very fortunate to have some of the great people that I worked with, to be able to work with them and have people in my career, I guess you'd say, that helped guided me and directed me into the right places. So, Desmond was definitely one of those that helped guide me to the right place, to be in the right place. And then Gordy was my mentor to become a tactical guy and a tactical instructor. And their loss was huge.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, like I was saying, hey, now I'm living my life, not only for me but for them, so that I can live the greatest life that I possibly can. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't trade my life for anything right now.
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I dig it. I appreciate it so much. Do you want to plug your tactical school, your
Yeah.
website?
So my training company is Nielsen Training and Consulting. You can find us at nielsentraining.com. We're on all the social pages under Nielsen Training or Nielsen Training and Consulting. However, I'm launching a new business for a training center here in the Utah County, Utah area, where we're going to have physical training, tactical training, firearms training, preparedness training, and everything all under one building. That's under BPMF Incorporated. We're hoping we can get that all launched in December, but it'll probably, in reality, it'll be more like in January. And right now we've got websites and social pages up. That's at bpmfinc.com. So you can find us all there. So
Nice.
a lot of cool stuff going on right now.
That's awesome, man. I'm super proud of you. I'm excited to see what you guys create and how you guys grow. I can't wait to see you again in person.
Oh yeah, dude, that's got to happen soon.
Yeah, we'll definitely make that. I was talking to my wife this morning about when we get back out to Utah. I'm feeling like that's got to happen sooner than later. And I just appreciate you taking the time, man, and talking about stuff that I think really matters and some of the important stuff about our own personal responsibility and accountability and all of that. So thank you for your time, and we'll do it again.